All right, the 40 series laptops. So I've been testing a bunch of them, and NVIDIA has some big claims going on, both in performance and energy efficiency. So let's start here, the MSI Titan. So this is arguably the most powerful laptop you can get on the market right now. It's running a 175 watt RTX 4090, and it's a faster performer than a desktop 3090 Ti. But this thing is big. It's thick, it's heavy, it's got a very powerful fan system, and when you have it running full tilt to be able to get those crazy scores, this thing is loud. So as powerful as it is, I don't feel like it's representative of the average kind of top-end 4090 device. So I was able to get this in, the Blade 16. Same 175 watt 4090, but it's in a much smaller package. And this device is, I think, a more accurate depiction of what the new 4090 series could do. So most of the benchmarks you're seeing are from this device. All right, frame rates across the board had a larger than normal bump from a generational change. We're talking like a 30 to 40% increase. So 1080p as well as 1440p get some significant gains, and 4K gaming as well gets a really nice boost. And if you look at ray tracing performance, it's also very noticeable in terms of what the new 40 series delivers. And then I also took a look at GPU accelerated workflows. So some apps like DaVinci and Blender that can lean really heavily on the GPU got some awesome performance uplifts, but some apps like my video editing software, which is Adobe Premiere, only got some small boosts. Now, when it comes to NVIDIA's 40 series GPUs, you're going to see the biggest gains in performance in games that support NVIDIA-specific tech, namely Dlss 3. So Dlss 3 has three main components. The first two are older. So the first is it can upscale an image to a higher resolution. Secondly, it's got the ability to reduce input latency. Both of those are cool and all, but they've existed before. But the third one, the new one, is the thing that's really special. It's frame generation. It's the ability to use AI and insert artificially generated frames in between real frames. And in some cases, you can legitimately double your frame rate. Like imagine going from 60 to 120 frames per second. It can be awesome. Now, the truth is, I'm normally just not excited by NVIDIA's AI and neural graphics tech. Like when DLSS 1 and DLSS 2 came out, when I did my videos on that stuff, I didn't even talk about DLSS, to the point where NVIDIA reached out. They're like, why didn't you talk about it? DLSS is awesome. And I was like, well, is it? Like, it's cool and all for desktop users, but on laptops, we have 1080p screens. The ability to upscale resolution is not all that useful when it comes to laptop gaming, but we all want more frames, right? So, frame generation, the ability to just magically create frames, how good? It's gotta be awesome, right? Okay, there's a lot to talk about here. Only a few games support this right now, but I do feel like this is tech that many developers will get on board with over time because frames are so valuable. So for the games that support this frame generation tech, the way that it works is that the game will actually delay showing you a real frame just for a split second, and it inserts an artificially generated frame before it. Now, it takes data from the game engine, like the motion vectors and a whole bunch of other data points, to try to interpolate what a properly generated frame would look like, and it creates this artificially generated one and it puts it in. But it invariably adds input latency to the game because it did have to delay that first frame to be able to pull this off. Now, if you just look at the frame rate bump, it's impressive, but let's talk about input latency. So I was testing The Witcher 3, A Plague Tale, the Spider-Man Miles Morales game, MS Flight Sim, and Cyberpunk, and truthfully, I did not notice any input latency with any of those games, and I was looking for it. Now, I did also try it with Warhammer 40k Darktide. It is slightly noticeable there, but again, I was really looking for it. Now, the thing to keep in mind is that all of those games don't need like precision input timing or crazy reflexes. They're pretty casual games, right? And even the character movements and the controls are built to almost mask latency if it existed. That's just the nature of those slower paced games, right? But using frame generation on a fast paced competitive shooter would be a completely different story. It would suck. Like if there's any kind of input latency when you're peeking corners, or if you're using a hit scan weapon, your performance in those games would be terrible. But for other games that are just not competitive shooters, I think the latency is a non-issue. But let's talk about the visual quality of frame generation. So slower paced games seem to have great image quality with frame generation. Witcher 3 is super demanding. It's been out for like 7 or 8 years, and it's still tough to get high frame rates on it. And when I have frame generation on, this looks and plays really well. And same with Cyberpunk. The frame generation is straight up doubling the frame rate here, but I think most people would actually have a tough time spotting any kind of visual deficiencies. But in a game like Miles Morales, things are different. So even though the controls are slower paced, graphically it can be a very fast game because as you swing around, things will zip by you on the screen. And I think the algorithm has a tough time keeping up with all the moving parts. And when I play with frame generation on, I can spot some visual artifacts in the scene. Now maybe it's because I've played this game so much. Like I completed on PS5, I recompleted it again on PC, and I've seen this game so much without frame generation. And when I have it on, I can spot the visual artifacts. But in general, I think this tech is awesome for games that are outside of competitive shooters. Okay, I want to wrap up this conversation with a talk about the things that I don't like about this launch. So first, the marketing. I think that the way that NVIDIA, well, in general, NVIDIA has pretty aggressive like marketing sauce that they throw on everything. But this time around, there was something that just rubbed me the wrong way. When they launched this thing, they announced like one of their opening things was like this product, 40 series GPUs, is 3 times more energy efficient than the previous generation. And when I first saw this, I was like super excited. And even at CES, they had a demo where they had one laptop that was running a 3080 Ti, but they had it 150 watt machine that was pumping out, I think like 65 frames per second or something like that. And then a second machine with the 40 series stuff that was 50 watts pumping out 75 frames per second. And I was like, this is awesome. Now, the way that NVIDIA was doing is that they're artificially capping the wattage on that second laptop, and they have the tools in-house to be able to pull this off. I can't replicate it on this end because we don't have access to stuff like that. But that difference was using DLSS 3, using the super sampling and the frame generation. And I feel like that's just not a good representation of, I feel like it's just poor marketing. Why would you put that as like your main opener, like your headlining thing? 3 times more energy efficient than the previous generation. I was bamboozled by it. I was like, this is gonna be crazy. Now, I think in some circumstances, in some games, sure, you do get that kind of energy efficiency kind of uptick, but it's just not with normal games. Realistically, it's probably like 30 to 40% more energy efficient. If you're just looking at like, vanilla rasterized graphics, which I still think is great, it's just not 300%. But the second thing that bugs me about this launch is the naming and consequently the price. So this is a 4090 series product, and they've never had a 90 moniker for any laptop product before. It's always like 2080, 3080. That was always the top of the line, the 80. Now you have a 90. It's better than the previous top of the line. So now they can charge more money. And if you look at the pricing of this stuff, it is mind-boggling how expensive it is. This 4090 equipped Razer Blade is priced at $4,300 US. Like, I've always thought that gaming laptops were one of those things that they're expensive, but it's a premium you have to pay to be able to get great performance in a portable package. Now, people that are into desktops are like, this is stupid, this is really silly stuff, why would you buy it? But there's a huge chunk of people that require portability on their performance machines, okay? But this time around, with this kind of pricing, it's like, oh my God. So I think like this is just the nature of any kind of early launch. There are a couple devices that I think are noteworthy that are, I wouldn't say cheaper, I'd say they're better, they're like less crazy. I'll be discussing those in the subsequent videos. But that's the 40 series. It's very capable this time around, like surprisingly so. The pricing is just nasty, really nasty. Okay, device specific reviews to come. There you have it. And this is just the most powerful flagship stuff. The 4060, 4070 devices will be launching in a couple weeks. We'll see you then. Stay tuned.